second now. But that's our focus, us enjoying
Okay.
ourselves.
Okay.
All right, any
And you
moment
want to
now.
start?
Any
You
moment
want to
now.
start today because you
No,
are
no,
invited.
no, 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 no. You go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
We are live. We are live.
Hello and welcome to Moreness-Culture. Good morning, Syl. Good morning,
Yes.
Crane. I hope Crane will join us soon. Hello, everyone. Whoever is watching us live on YouTube, Instagram soon, and also in the on FB group, Sassy. Please,
Yeah.
you are most welcome to this Moreness-Culture, this tiny world right now. It is tiny in size, but great in value, enormous, enormous, humongous value. I'm not saying that because this is what we are creating. I'm saying that because this is true. It all matters about value. This is all about value, and all our focus and our intents are geared towards extracting value and creating value, which is quite different to that. Okay, yes, this is something I found valuable, so I'm doing this. No, people who are on the path of way of impeccability, and of course they are on the way of impeccability, they are able to, they become able to, of course, Cell enables them to be able to create value even when it is not obviously there.
Yes, to
This is something that's a
extract
real,
value.
yes.
Yes, create
This
value,
is this is
extract it and create it. Yes, either or.
this is yes, this is something really amazing and magical about way of faculty and women's culture.
Yeah,
Of course, our
yeah,
focus is more towards on Moreness project right now because we are doing capital R reading and it's going above and beyond way of impeccability. But I always keep reminding myself, this sharing is all about for me, like, okay, I want to have this. So I keep reminding myself that how profound way of impeccability and how crucial way of impeccability courses and program is for me still,
yeah,
because that way of impeccability is the real foundation. It brings me, it created that foundation where I'm stepping on, and then out now I can see, okay, and a bit understand. I cannot say that I'm completely able to understand moreness, but at least I'm able to understand a bit of moreness by
exactly.
having the foundation of way of impeccability. So way of impeccability program is crucial. I say for everyone, but the people who want to have moreness in their life, way of impeccability is the key. This is the first step. You cannot
Yeah,
skip it. It is absolutely crucial because it
yeah,
makes you enable to see moreness, to be able to extract value and create moreness. And in
exactly.
every aspect of your life, what moreness
Yeah,
is? Moreness is going beyond need.
yes,
It's a way of freedom from needs,
exactly,
where you choose things, where you can choose things, where you can make choices according to your impeccability,
exactly.
according to your awareness. We live in
Yes,
this world of need right now,
and
where we
according to
need.
appropriateness.
Exactly.
That's the
Yes,
key.
absolutely. According to appropriateness, which is very important. Thank you for reminding me. So this thing is moreness for me is getting beyond the world of
Yeah,
need of everything, like need of love.
yeah,
When you have some of idea of moreness, you don't need love. you you want, yes, it's a different thing, but you don't need that. You don't feel
correct,
deprived. You
correct,
don't feel that, oh, if I'm
correct.
not receiving love from things, so I'm in a
Yes,
desperate situation. So moreness is
exactly.
going out of needs, beyond the needs, and living in the world, in
Yes,
a new world where there is no desperation, there is no stress, there is no need, there is no shoulds. There is a freedom, the freedom of being, which comes after peace of being. We can have peace of
yes,
being that, okay, yes, I am good, I'm happy who I am. Okay, this is my choices. I understand and I accept and I acknowledge. But moreness is going beyond that.
Oh,
Then you
super
acquire
important.
freedom of being. Then you acquire
Oh,
freedom of being. And then you become fluid. Moreness is the world of fluidity, where you can be anything.
very, very, very important. It's very, very important. That's quite marvelous, Beena. I love this. I love this. I love your introduction. Very wonderful. I'm ready.
Yes.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yes,
Very cool.
thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for
Oh,
giving me time. And now we have done all the sharing part, which is very technical, and still always
uh,
take care of it. And I just fill in this time because what we
yeah,
are doing is the capital R reading of Don Juan's books via Carlos Castaneda.
yeah.
This is something very interesting. That to
The
read
reading
something.
to be technical, the reading of Don Juan via Carlos Castaneda's books. Yes?
Yes,
All right.
yes. Don Juan's,
Right.
yes. And
Yeah.
our intent is that we are meeting, we are actually interacting with Don Juan, not the
Yeah.
books. We are not doing the reading of Carlos Castaneda.
Oh,
We are trying to connect and interact and communicate with Don Juan
exactly.
and connecting to his intent,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
as he'll
And
always
his
mention.
moreness.
Yes, because he'll always mention that the translation, we have to give a lot of margin for the translation, because
Oh,
maybe he might be not saying that, maybe his intent is not that, because so many words which sound so cool and profound on surface, but because Syl is very deep and thorough person, and he says no, it has implications, and
well,
those implications cannot be coming from Don Juan, because as he know him, so
yeah.
he says that okay, yeah, it's a margin of translation errors or not
Yes.
efficient translation. So that's why this capital R reading is special, because we are trying to connect with the
Correct.
moreness of Don
Correct.
Juan and also the
Correct.
intent of Don Juan. This is what we are
Correct.
doing here.
And I
So
bring my own moreness. You know,
exactly.
it's kind of hard for me to say. I have a natural humility and modesty, but you know, this is something that I've been working on literally all of my life. Yeah.
No sound, still. Sorry, no sound. You have to wait a bit. Exactly. Syl is a humble person. I don't say, I don't know that okay he will be agree with the humble, but the humility, yes, his
Oh,
innate humility makes him a bit awkward when to acknowledge. It's not claiming anything, but it is just simply stating the facts. This is something he has been doing and he is doing continuously throughout his life, and surprisingly from the very early age of 6 and 10, and then it was like really. I really feel that, okay, how
yeah.
stupid I feel
Oh
when I compare
no.
myself at the age of 10 to him.
Yeah.
And
But
he
don't. You know, I
at that
I
time.
yeah. I really feel that there was carryover of some kind.
Yes.
I knew things at a very early age, you know, particularly at age 6. I had a very significant experience. It was insignificant in itself. You know, most people have had something similar. It's like, yeah, you know, whatever. It's just one of those things. But the consequence was profound, and I had an understanding and an awareness that uh, it just it's anomalous, right? So I feel, and the more I've looked at this, it's the only explanation that makes sense to me, is that I had some kind of a carryover, right? All the work I did somehow, you know, it looped around and I was able to remember, or at least not remember in the usual memory, but because my learning isn't focused on memory, because we lose memory, but focused on being differently and understanding things so innately that it stays with you. And that's what happened, right? That was what happened in terms of like appropriateness. I understood appropriateness at that incident that happened at age 6, right? And also having a private self and a public self and so on. So it really made a mass, and that changed my life completely. Just developing those two sides, it made all the difference in the world. It's a very, very big deal. So yes, this is quite magical. Beena, please just let me know if my mic does cut out. I don't know why it does that.
Yes, I
Everything
will.
is fine. I don't change anything.
Yes,
I
right
don't
now it
do
is fine.
anything. Yeah. Before we get started, we're about to continue reading in a moment. Please,
Yes.
will you check Instagram and make sure that
Yes, I'm doing.
I am live there. I made a comment, and when I hit enter, it sort of froze the screen a bit there. So I don't know what happened there. Yeah. Anyway, I was trying to make sure it is still live. I don't want to refresh the page. I'll just leave it, if it is there. So anyway, just keep an eye on it in terms of comments, and we'll keep going. One more thing to do. I wanted to share this to Norma. Just Norma likes to come, and sometimes she gets involved, I think, and doesn't notice the time. So we'll share to Norma. Yeah, just we love Norma, so we like Norma being here. Very cool. And it was nice yesterday. We had Christopher Abbott here. That's pretty cool. All right. Very cool. Let's get going. Hello. Welcome, Beena. Beena said hello. Welcome to Moreness-Culture. Oh, you said it on YouTube. Very cool. Let's share screen and get going. Very good. Very good indeed. All right. So we are again coming back to where Don Juan is teaching Carlos about the Tura, or devil's weed, as he calls it, right? Or Jimson weed, as it's commonly known, and to use it in a very different way, of course. Now, I've stressed this many times that this whole procedure, it's very long and complicated, and there's a lot of detail here, but it's not replicatable, right? And this is very important to be aware of, right? And so for me, from when I was first acquainted this, I had spent my whole life figuring things out for myself. Yeah. Only much later, after much figuring out, did I come across books that had a content in it that was usable, because I wasn't interested in just things that sound good. I encountered much stuff later on when I started really reading seriously, because I read lots before I looked at this type of thing. Like books at that time, self-help books, they were called, right? Actually, they weren't really called. That when I first started, there was no self-help section in the library or the bookstore. It's hard to believe. Today, I think you go to the average bookstore, it's like the biggest section of them all, right? But there was none. I remember the shelf in the bookstore that was near my home, just one block away. I'd pass on the way to the supermarket. I remember the day that they made this self-help bookshelf, and there were like 3 or 4 books that they put on them, right? And one was Your Erroneous Zones by Wayne Dyer, and the other one was by Shakti Gawain about visualization. And I don't remember the other 2, right? Those 2 books, Shakti Gawain's one didn't have any impact on me, but Wayne Dyer's book was very good, right? Your Erroneous Zones, a very clever title, obviously a play on the word with your erogenous zones, because around about that time also, and a little earlier than that, there'd been those big studies by Masters and Houston, Masters and Johnston, and all that. I mean, there's a Showtime or HBO TV series on it, right? And so that was like kind of a big deal, and they introduced this term, your erogenous zone. We take a lot of things for granted. Like today, you say, oh, your erogenous zones. We don't think twice about this. It's like just part of our language. It's like no big deal. But I remember when this terminology came out, it was a big deal. There was no conception of it. Yeah, I mean, people, I guess, sort of knew it, but they didn't have a word for it, for their erogenous zones, right? I mean, it's sort of like an obvious thing, but there wasn't a word for it, right? Or this, phrase. Is very powerful. So it's quite fascinating when we look at these things and we see the origin. And again, visualization. a common word we don't think twice about. That book of Shakti Gawain's brought that term into our vocabulary as it's used now. These things are new. So much of our language that we take for granted comes from that period of the 60s and the 70s. Yes, a lot of new stuff came then. Lots of new stuff. It was really an age of investigation and experimentation, and new and exciting. And so it's become part of the norm, but it wasn't up until that time. At any rate, so what I was saying is, when I came to really, I didn't even realize I had a comprehensive and cohesive uh, system of not just philosophy but psychology. And I struggle to use the word philosophy, because philosophy is kind of boring and dusty and theoretical. No, I had a system of application, of usability, a way of being and a way of living that I had developed through trial and error, research, study, and my desire, my intent, which started at age 10, to really focus on enhancing and developing my awareness, right? Growing my awareness, being more aware. That was my very specific and focused intent. Daily, I worked on this. So by the time I always read a lot, but I would read adventure stories and novels and all sorts of fun things. So I started seriously reading. This was the culmination, Carlos. Quite inadvertently, it just happened to be at the end of my big reading project where I read all the classics. And like I said, they weren't really self-improvement books, self-help books. I looked for them, but they just didn't exist, right? And so this Carlos fell into that category. At least I put him there. When Carlos first came out, he was put under anthropology. Later, he was shifted to all sorts of different things. I have no idea where they put him today, but I've seen Carlos on at least probably a dozen different categories, right, in the bookstores and in the libraries. It's quite fascinating. It's really quite amazing how there's this sort of a confusion about Carlos. And so it's magical, because to me, it's like the universe is testing you. Now, the point I want to make is, coming at this from a self-improvement point of view, and specifically my intent when I looked at self-improvement, it had to be usable. There was a lot of stuff out there that was like, I don't know, like early woo-woo, yeah? And it sounded great. And also, you go back to the Buddhists, they got some fantastic stuff. I mean, I really studied Buddhism quite extensively. That's some fantastic stuff, but it's not usable, right? And to me, that was useless. And as you know, in Way of Impeccability, this is a key theme. Without application, it's all meaningless, right? So this is very important. And now we come to why I keep emphasizing all of this focus of that we have now on the Tura, and then later on the smoke, and on peyote, mescalito. It's not usable, right? At least mescalito might be, to some extent, if you can, you can go today in the world. There are people that have trained and learned, and you can learn about it, and you can even learn to be a guide with it if you really want to make that your path, like anything else, right? But on things like the datura, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who has this. At least I've never heard of anybody ever. I've never heard any anecdotal stories where people said, "Oh yeah, I found a guide and they helped me and I was able to, do." No, I haven't seen anything about either the datura or the smoke. Yes, there's lots of stuff out there in our modern world with mushrooms, but the smoke is different to taking mushrooms, right? And yes, the mushroom is an ingredient, but it's a whole different deal. Anyway, like I said, these two, I've never seen anything about it anywhere else. I'm sure it might exist, but I'm sure I would have seen it by now. But anyway, so my point is, the incident itself, because it's not usable for me, has much less interest. It's interesting, but not of interest, right? I've said this many times and I'll repeat it, because as we're going to come now, you're going to see there's some really wild stuff going on here. It's quite fascinating. But I don't want to get pulled into this bubble that Carlos is infatuated with this stuff, because the whole book is really focused on it. And as we're going to see in books 2 and 3, which happen in the same time period, that he completely misses the boat by his inappropriate focus on these experiences, right? The hallucinogenic experiences. It's completely missing the boat. All right, that was the culture at the time. Everybody, it was like the big thing, fascinating. I mean, it may even have been where LSD was still legal. I don't know exactly when they made it illegal, but certainly in the mid 60s, I'm pretty sure, or even late 60s, it was still legal, right? And it was a big deal, and studying it and the moreness of it and all of the stuff, right? So yeah, it was much, today, yes, you've got like MDM or MDMA or whatever. I forget the letters, and there's other things, and um, uh, what's the one from the rainforest? Ayahuasca. No, am I saying it wrong? Anyway, there's still interest out there, right? And it's still a thing, sort of, but nothing compared to back in the day. Back in the day, this was, even if you, like in South Africa, we had no access to it whatsoever, but it was still part of the conversation in general, right? In the way, I don't know, you may have like the Super Bowl be a part of the conversation, or the Olympics. You know what I mean? Okay, it's Olympics time. People talk about the Olympics, but when it isn't something like that going on, well, even during that, this was a constant topic that would come up in conversation. It's hard to imagine that how big a deal it was, and of course, you got to keep in mind, when I grew up, I had no TV, and not because we were poor and didn't have a TV. Well, well, you know, but the country itself got TV very late. Yeah, they only got TV in 1975, and then it was 2 hours a day for 2 years, and then it went up to like four hours for a year or two. Now, basically, by the time I graduated at the end of the 70s from school, there was, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours of TV a day. And then it went on further, and it took another year or 3 or 4, and then it was, TV all the time like we have now. But that was quite marvelous. So keep in mind, of course, there's limited TV plus no internet whatsoever. So what do people talk about? They talk about stuff that they read about in the newspapers and magazines, or hear about on the radio. Now, on the radio, they wouldn't talk much. The radio was kind of government radio in a way, right? Or even if it was private, it was still, very, very, very conventional, right? But magazines like Time magazine and whatever, this is where people they would talk about the stuff, especially Time magazine. Time magazine was very interesting. It's still around, Time magazine, but back then it was the magazine, right? This is where anything that was important and vital and significant, and that was it. And Carlos was on the cover in 1973. And to be on the cover of Time magazine was a huge deal. Any article in there, this is what people spoke about, because where else are you getting any information, right? So, yeah. Joseph, you keep saying this every time I bring this up. You say, I disagree, it is usable. Yes, Joseph. Again, I said this before, and I'll reiterate. It is not usable for me or for anybody trying to use it from the book. Of course, power plants are usable when you have an appropriate practitioner or guide, or somebody who's knowledgeable about it. But it's not usable from the book, right? So I want to really make this point very clear, Joseph, because you mentioned the same point before, and you misunderstood me then also. I'm not saying it isn't usable. I never said this. I'm not saying this. Of course it's usable, but it's not usable in the format presented. Yeah. So there's a nuance to my usability here, and it's a very key nuance, because if you try and use it from the book, as you yourself said, you're gonna get yourself killed or very ill, right? So it's not usable in the way it is presented. It's not usable from the book, right? And I doubt if there's anybody in the world today that is seriously using the Torah. Yeah, it's just not worth it. It's just too risky. It's just too dangerous, right? Like I said earlier, I've never heard of, there are many stories and out there of people having gone and do peyote and all of the stuff. Aldous Huxley famously wrote about his mescaline experience, right? It's a very famous book, a very well documented book, right? And mescaline and peyote, mescalito, it's related, right? Mescaline is the synthesized version. Now, he didn't meet mescalito, which is a very big difference, but he had a very significant experience which really changed his life in a big way. But so there's a lot in this, and what I'm saying is, if you're interested in this field, this topic, you're going to be connected to related things. Yes, like Michael Harner with shamanism. I don't even know if that name means anything today, but shamanism is something that came from the word. It's a difficult name to pronounce. I think it's a Czechoslovakian fellow. Mircea Eliade, I think is how you pronounce the name, right? Anyway, he did a study of all around the world of indigenous cultures, specifically on their medicinal, psychological, spiritual, philosophical practices, right? And he used this term shamanism because it comes from Siberia, right? In indigenous peoples there, and they called this person the shaman, right? And today it's part of our language, but this was a new term. I mean, back in the day, it was just witch doctor. That was the only term available, right? And over time it became a negative term. It didn't really start off as much of a positive one either. So anyway, so this shamanism term was a big deal. But so he brought this out, right? And you can go look up his book. It's a very thick, big book, very comprehensive study. I mean, it's really quite an amazing accomplishment that he did. However, it was something that was kind of, sort of in the realm of academics, yes, and the practices that shamans employed. It wasn't something that was accessible to the average person. Michael Harner made shamanism and had courses and wrote a book on it where you could learn to be a shaman yourself. Yeah. Beena and I know a couple of people who call themselves shamans, right, Beena?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Personally
Yeah.
know them. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and we did some shows with them on somebody else's show where we were guests and they were guests too, and we were invited
And
to
I
be on
have a
that.
friend
So
also. I have a
right,
very good friend
right.
also who is
Exactly,
also a shaman.
exactly. And they call themselves, I'm a shaman. And now it might not be like Venus' friend. It's not their profession. The people that I was talking about, this is their business, their work,
Oh,
their
yes.
vocation
Yes.
is a more accurate term, right? But this came from Michael Harner, right? He started this, like visualization. He may not technically have been the first one, but let me put it this way: he popularized it and he brought it into our culture as something that is accessible to the ordinary individual, right? Now, through Michael Harner and reading that stuff, this is what I'm saying to say. I never saw any mention ever anywhere of someone like Michael Harner talking about the Torah, yes, or Timson weed, devil's weed, yeah, etc. Right? Never, and never anybody talking that. That's so. This is something that, yes, there is usability in medicine plants in general, in hallucinogens in general, absolutely. In spiritual substances that shift you, that maybe not give you an hallucinogenic experience, right? Because that's a very different thing to you may to a spiritual experience, right? Like people who modern day mushroom usage. Yes, there's recreational mushrooms And there's somebody that we know also very well, know them very intimately, that have described their experiences with mushroom, and it's a completely 100% spiritual focus. The whole taking of it, there's absolutely no focus whatsoever in terms of recreational. No, this is not for your, like, to relax you or chill you out or any kind of health benefits. Purely spiritual, everything focused. So there's a whole segment in our society where you can go and find this. Like I said, I know of it, and I discuss this stuff a lot, and yeah. So, but I've never seen, not once, ever, not once have I ever seen a mention about the Tura, right? Or have I ever seen about the smoke? Like I said before, Carlos says it's, it identifies these three things as the Tura and psilocybin, which is the mushroom, and peyote. But psilocybin, it's not mentioned. And he says question mark, maybe, right? So he's not even sure exactly what the mushroom is that goes into the smoke, right? But beside which, Don Juan never says the mushroom is his ally. Doesn't say that. He says the smoke is his ally. One moment.
So your sound was cutting off. Again, say something. No.
Uh,
No.
all right, now, yes, there I'm back. I'm back. For whatever reason, the microphone just decides to cut out. I got to unplug it and plug it back in again, and then it works fine. Anyway, I'm saying, when I came to this, my interest in this was not from an anthropological point of view. It wasn't from a research in terms of medicine plants, which is a very different focus, right? It can be, depending on the individual, for medicinal use as opposed to spiritual use, right? So I'm coming at this book from a self-help point of view. Self-help. In other words, what can I use and apply? And that's why I'm glad you see where I'm coming from, Joseph, because it's a very important point, because I don't mean to disparage medicine plants. Absolutely not. Or and particularly, medicinal use is something that's all around the world, and it's a very big deal, right? And the range now, that medicinal use extends into psychological treatments and also spiritual, right? The extension of psychological, you get spiritual, but they have distinctly different places. Yes, like I said, for instance, with the mushrooms, I mean, there's the medicinal use of it, which I haven't heard much specifically where you're using these psychotropic mushrooms to treat, let's say, heart problems or whatever, liver issue or something like that. I haven't ever heard of that, but I suspect likely it's possible. But certainly with the mushrooms specifically, because they are a kind of a big deal out there now, and in I'll just call it drug culture, right? And drug culture is a very different thing. It's not always accessible to everybody, or it's outside of their world. But I've had good experience and contact with it. When I had my stores in California, in Capitola specifically. Capitola is in Santa Cruz County. Santa Cruz is kind of just like a few years removed from the 60s, and it's still a hippie culture, right? And as a incredibly strong, big, involved drug culture. Now,
No sound, Syl. Just wait a minute. No.
oh, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, it
now.
just cuts out and then it comes back. That's very interesting.
Yes.
It's very strange.
Yes.
Anyway, so Silicon Valley is right across the mountain, like 40-minute drive away. Yeah, and if you want a good job, you just go to Silicon Valley, right? Especially at the time that I was there, right? But many of the people in, especially young people in Santa Cruz, because they couldn't pass a drug test, couldn't get a job in Silicon Valley. So they ended up working for me in my retail stores, right? And these were very sharp, wonderful people. They were great, right? I mean, they weren't like well, this is like a last resort kind of a deal, which we tend to think sometimes people end up in retail. It's a very negative image and it's quite inaccurate. Most of people end up in retail or do retail as a stepping stone to somewhere else, right? They in college or whatever, right? But anyway, so I had all this, and they would come and go on a regular basis also because, well, it's retail, and secondly, they got themselves cleaned up and eventually they got good jobs and all that, right? And I'm still in contact with some of them, right? Or I can be. I don't contact them that much, right? Um, anyhow, so they being with them in the store, and I was 10 years, right? And I must have had, I don't know, literally hundreds of employees because we had 4 stores and come and go, right? And so I got a real inside look into that drug culture, which I'd had little touches of it before here and there, but not to the extent there. And from all sides of it, right? So into recreation and there's like a whole subculture within this greater culture. And I was always fascinated at this sort of a bit of the bubbleness that they had around. Like those who were into drinking, they didn't want to mess with or mix. They didn't really mix with those who were doing marijuana, right? And those who did marijuana, they kind of stayed away from those who did the harder drugs. It was just too fascinating. But you know what was interesting too? From listening, and they would talk amongst each other and they would click, and people, when one person who's into the drugs is talking to another and they're talking about their whole stuff, and they're not really aware. I mean, they know you can hear them, but they don't really think that you're listening with intent, right? Because I would be like working in the office and then be doing stuff on the internet, because that was when the internet started and we sold stuff on eBay. And they would really get into these deep discussions, not realizing how much they are sharing. But anyway, maybe they didn't care, but I learned an incredible amount, right? And what was too fascinating to me was that uh, after a while, just simply because I'm a student of people and student of awareness, and I practice capital H hearing, which is hearing implication, hearing what's not said, hearing beyond what's said. I could tell what kind of substance was their preference, what they were into. And I was like to tell the drinkers from the marijuana smokers, the dopers, as they would call themselves, and others, and those who were into the hard drugs. I could tell from the way they spoke, the way they conceived things, the way they cognized things, the way they communicated. Right? It was really fascinating. I used to teach, especially the guys who had done hard drugs. Mostly we had guys. I had a big knife store, and it was a very desirable place to work. I'll read your comments in a moment, Joseph. Right? So the guys who are into the hard drugs, I used to say, man, you got holes in your head. And I would kind of tease them, because if you paid attention, right, most of the time when people listen, they listen what they expect to hear, and they fill in the gaps. But if you listen to every word, like I encourage Beena to literally read what's written, not read what you think should be written, not read what's supposed to be written, but read the typos, in other words, right? It's a very good skill, because if you apply this to people, you're going to hear their typos. Now, not in a sense of like their Freudian slips kind of a stuff, right? And you hear all the mourners. So the guys who had done the hard drugs, especially, fairly extensively, I used to teach them, so you got holes in your head. And then towards the end of, I know, after I'd already left the stores, I saw a brain imaging study where they had new technology that allowed them to do actual, like, create a photograph, right, like a 3D photograph of the brain. And lo and behold, the brains of those that had used hard drugs, their brains, the imaging, it looked like Swiss cheese, holes in the brain. I used to tease them because they would talk, and then they would be like, they would have a continuous sentence, right, even in the middle of the sentence or from one sentence to the next, but there'd be stuff missing. It's absolutely fascinating. It's like if you took a written page and you just randomly removed strings of words. This is what they would do and not realize it. But of course, our brains are able to fill in for them, right? And I saw this. Actually, the photograph literally showed it. And the brains of those that alcohol was their primary things. They look kind of like pickled, and I can't remember what the marijuana users. I can't remember what their brains look like. But I just remember pickled and the Swiss cheese. It was quite fascinating. At any rate, I'm saying that I had this really extensive connectivity to that culture because it's a big deal over there, right? And you're getting many people coming and going, sharing their stories, sharing their experiences. I remember I had one employee who was a doper. But he was like, in wine, you get the wine connoisseurs, and you always see it in the movies, right? And they would, swirl and sip the wine and say, oh, yes, this comes from the southern region of Bordeaux, and, blah, and they give you all the details of it. He could do that exact same thing with marijuana. He was absolutely just the most expert on it. That was incredible, right? He'd tell you exactly where it come from, what the effects would be, how it would work. I mean, he ended up being a teacher, right? He still is actually. He still is a friend on Facebook. He because in the store, Moreness-Culture. They didn't call it Moreness-Culture back then. And I didn't share with the intent of getting anybody to convert or be part of, or no. I just was me, right? But me being me in that environment, it had quite an effect on many of the people that worked there, right? And then they'll tell you so directly, right? It's not just me imagining this. And this fellow in particular, he shifted, and because I would ask them, say, what's important to you, what connects to you, and you don't have to be trying to teach anybody something. You ask him a question like that, and I sincerely wanted to know. I wasn't trying to change them or anything, but of course, questions like that, when asked sincerely, can have a very profound effect, and it did on him. And he realized that he was on a path that, even though he was expert, it wasn't a path with heart. Yeah, and so he became a teacher, and that's a path one. He still is, right, for him, a very big deal. So. Joseph says, yes, about the usable part. Yes, Joseph, absolutely. There is great value to be had from medicine plants, particularly in the spiritual realm, spiritual, psychological learning, self-growth. But you have to go to the appropriate environment to do this. Not everybody is in a situation where such environments are available to them, right? And this is my caution, because in reading this, because there is extensive value that can be had, right? One might be tempted to try and replicate from the information presented, right? Especially in the datura, because there's so much detail, to replicate this, right? And I'm really being super cautious here, because this has caused trouble with people trying to replicate this, right? So that's my point, is not that there isn't value. This specific information isn't valuable. So yes, you can go and find guides, absolutely, and people to teach you. But that also requires quite a big deal, and not everybody has the resources to leave where they're at, to go away, etc. Right? So we sort of limited sometimes, like in South Africa. No matter how much I may have wanted to, it just simply was not available at the time. I mean, I couldn't come to this country. Locally, it wasn't available, right? Or at least from a shamanistic point of view, well, I would have had a hard time accessing, but I could have, right? I did apprentice to a shaman for a while. There was nothing there really, but okay, because I had a strong desire to, but desire and access not always the same time. So shamanism, good point. Shamanism is unique to Siberia, precisely, or at least originally. And then, Joseph says, where I live, they are called Mamakai. Yes. And like in South Africa, now, people want to say in black culture. There's no such thing as black culture in South Africa. You got Zulu culture, you got Sotho, Swana, Xhosa, you name it, right? And then you got like Bushmen, which is very small, very few Bushmen left. But Bushmen and Zulu, two completely different cultures. I mean, it's from like as extreme as, I don't know, whatever other cultures you want to juxtapose, right? So South African culture is very complex. I mean, it's completely different languages. Now, yes, some of them are related, like Zulu and Xhosa. They were part of the same migration from the north. And most, not most, all of current South Africa was not inhabited by the current black tribal cultures at the time when the first white settlers came there. They were moving in from the north, coming down, migrating further south and spread out, right? And then they kind of clashed in sort of more or less in the middle of South Africa. So it's just something that not many are aware of, that, we tend to think of, black cultures, Zulu, Swana, whatever, as indigenous to South Africa. Yes, it's indigenous, but for the last couple of 100 years only. The people who were living there, they were mostly exterminated. People like the Bushmen, the Griquas, the Hottentots, right? That's it. It's just a couple of different, but it's very sparse, because for the most part, the interior of the country is like Arizona. You're not going to go and choose to live there unless you're basically getting kicked out of where else you're living, right? So, and it's a big barrier coming from further north, where much more fertile and stuff like that, right? Much easier to live just from a hunting point of view. If you're living off the land in semi-desert, like the Southwest, it's not an easy task, right? Where you've got grasslands and forests and stuff like that, a lot more game and stuff, much easier to live from, right? So those tribes moving north was because of not only population pressure, but war pressure, right? And also ego pressure. Many of these, what today have a distinct culture, language and everything, they started as a schism from a leadership point of view, where somebody said, oh, I'm going to go and start my own tribe. To hell with you guys, right? And that's exactly what happened, right? So it's very important to understand. Now, so yes, all over the world, it doesn't matter. And every part of the world has something akin to shamanism. Now, yes, the word shaman is the original word. The Siberian word is unique to Siberia. The English word shaman has nothing to do with Siberia. Well, not nothing, but it's not specifically associated with Siberia. Most people don't even know it originates there. So we have to understand language. That language is something that when you start becoming aware, and where before, whatever tribe or indigenous population it was, and you had this person in this role, there's some similarities. Of course, they have the unique differences too. But we aggregate and we abstract and we apply a term. The term for that individual or individuals was witch doctor before. Yeah. So when this Mircea Eliade, if I'm pronouncing or his name, when he started aggregating and abstracting and putting it together, he saw the similarities in all the indigenous cultures. And then he started to use this one word, shaman, for all of it, right? Or at least people reading him used it. So the English word shaman is a synonym for witch doctor. It's not specifically referring to the Siberian individuals, right? So we have to understand language. This is how language works. Now, I mean, they could have used any word. He could have made up a word, but that's just the word that has come to be, right? So we must understand that this is how the things work, right? So where I live, they are called Mamakai, says Joseph, which is very cool to know. I hadn't heard that specific word before, which is very cool. I've heard others, but not that particular one. Like I said, in South Africa, Sangoma is also a word. Now, I don't know from which specific tribal culture, language it originated, but certainly in modern South Africa, or at least the subcontinent, this would have probably applied Botswana, Rhodesia, Namibia, etc. The term is it's not tribally, culturally specific, right? It applies to the shaman, in other words. But in South Africa, you'd call them a sangoma. Right? I've never heard the term shaman used there, right? But that sangoma though wasn't used with the Bushmen, and people would be a bit stuck with the Bushmen. And in more modern times, maybe a little bit here and there, people would talk about the shaman, but there were so few Bushmen around, and they didn't really have that shaman anymore. Like the Bushmen that I knew, they had lost the ability to make poison. Yeah, it was a skill that was lost to them, and this was something that typically came by the shaman. So his role was really, divination, rolling the bones. Tolosa they called there. It's never used the term bones. It's an Afrikaans word, right? But it's joints, knuckle joints, I think. Anyway, and you roll them and you shake them, you throw them on the ground, and it's equivalent to reading tea leaves or any other divination. There's hundreds of different divination mechanisms, right? But I never heard him, and his name was called Regopstaan in Afrikaans, right? Because they spoke Afrikaans too, the Bushmen, and that's how I communicated with them, which means stand up straight, stand erect, stand upright. Now, this wasn't because he had good posture. It was because when they first encountered him, the people who brought them to where I was, they were up in the north, living on a farmer's land. There's very little free, open land like where you can just go and live. It doesn't exist in South Africa anymore. It's all owned by people, right? Anyway, so then they were basically living off handouts from the shepherds, and the shepherds are like at the absolute bottom of the economic order, right? I mean, shepherds, they don't have much, so they were basically people. They were starving, they were struggling. So these owners of this game ranch, that on top of the mountain where we were, they said, well, the Bushmen used to live here. There's cave paintings over here. At one time they lived here. Let's bring them back down here. And it was a whole big deal in the newspapers and everything. And they did. They brought the whole tribe there. And that's how I came to know them. At any rate, so when they first encountered these guys and they saw Regopstaan, I don't know what his actual name is. Everybody just called him that after that, right? This became his name. I mean, essentially, it's a nickname, of course. But when they first met him, he was sitting off to the side and he was reading a Playboy magazine. Yeah, well, this goes to show, see, some things kind of universal. And that's where his name comes from, right? So it's very interesting, right? The loincloths that they were wearing, they don't hide much, obviously, right? So just a fun point here on his name. Now, he was quite an interesting fellow, and like I said, I connected with him, and he taught me how to do those. But like I said, so much of it is, I don't know, maybe I missed some of it, but he struggled to communicate how exactly he was doing this, and maybe I was like Carlos and missed the point. But also there was a grand measure of just ordinary psychological application, astute observation of people, and sharing, and listening to them, sharing what's appropriate, basically fancifying what any good competent life coach or psychologist will do. Yeah. So for me, it was a bit disappointing. I was hoping for more, but like I said, I may have missed the point also, right? I may not have fully been able to grasp at the time what he was sharing. So Joseph goes on, so you can learn to be a shaman if you are not from that culture. This depends, Joseph. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. All depends on the culture. So the abstract similarities of shamanism, right, where they using medicinal substances, and they fulfill the role of not only healer but also of psychologist and philosopher, yes, and spiritual guide. So all of those, yes, this is typically, and and they're an influence in the, like a religious, like priests would have an influence, right? You've got the mayor, and then at least in the towns that I grew up, right, you got the mayor who had kind of regular influence on ordinary stuff, and then you had the minister. They weren't priests because it was not a Catholic environment, but same thing happens with Catholics. But the priests who would have now spiritual authority, right? And there was always that kind of ordinary and then the spiritual, right? And the same thing, you got the chief of the tribe, and then you've got the medicine person, right? Or in modern language, modern English, the shaman, right? So when we say, I believe shamanism is cultural appropriation, no, Joseph, it is simply an aggregate term to apply to something that is common all around the world. I mean, they could have called it medicinism, which is hard to pronounce, which is maybe why they didn't call it. But see, now, if you say medicinism, then you're only focusing on the medicinal part. And if you say, well, they really are, the tribe psychologist, well, then you're only focusing on that part. They play a multiple role. Yes. So you can't just say, use terms that indicate or imply healing only, or psychology only, or philosophy only, because they would teach people how to live also in many cases, right? Which is philosophical. And then there's the spiritual part, right? So this term shamanism is for an individual who checks all of those boxes, which is typically what they did, right? Anybody who was other than the ordinary day-to-day administration and ruling, which is typically what we today would call the chief, right, or leader, right? And they would have the non-psychological, non-philosophical, non-spiritual, non-healing part. That was it, right? Ordinary authority. So when we are saying cultural appropriation, this is something that it's a very tricky term. All cultures practice cultural appropriation. Every single culture. Every single culture. Yes, all of them. All of them. Hello, Norma. Hello, Norma. Norma says she'll catch us all later, right? Because even in the most remote of the rainforests tribes, right, which you still find, they still have contact with other tribes that are also remote, right? There are none that live in complete and utter isolation. And of course, whenever there's interaction, you see something that's valuable, you use it. End of story. Yeah. This is how we grow. This is how we learn. This is how we evolve, right? Sometimes it comes internally, right? Somebody in the tribe, you may be very isolated, but it's very hard to be 100% isolated. At some point, you're going to come out with, because there's always somebody who does a bit of exploring, right? And connecting and interactivity. And through that, and even if it's not somebody from your tribe or their tribe, could be completely third person, like traders, for instance, right? You learn stuff. You pick stuff up. Oh, that's a good idea. Now, anybody who is in a situation where life isn't like ours, where you have an abundance of things available to you. Yes, when you see something that, wow, that's kind of cool, that's a better way of doing things, you're going to use it. Why would you not use it? Why would you not use something that is valuable and useful? Right? I mean, there are times where people didn't use this because, okay, religion says you can't or whatever, right? So there can be those countercultural influences for people adopting behaviors, right? But in general, when you see something, especially if it's in a very ordinary way, very ordinary, simple thing, well, take the fork. You're using implements to eat with. I don't know, you're just scooping with. You don't. Okay, back in the day, you don't think to use a fork or a spoon, yeah. But somebody comes, oh, okay, well, that's kind of more convenient way of doing it, instead of slurping and messing or whatever, right? I'm just trying to find a simple example of something, yeah. Or shoes, yeah. Somebody comes along and they're wearing shoes. Everybody's bare feet. Holy moly! Wow, yeah, okay. I've got thick soles. I've got nice calluses on my feet. You still get splinters. You still get thorns in your feet, despite those things, right? I saw this with the Bushmen. They were capable of going bare feet, but they preferred to wear shoes. And now, what is that? Is that cultural appropriation by them, Joseph? I would see this. So right. So on the game reserve where we were, right? When they first came there, they had very little. So their clothing was a mixture of the sort of more what we would call traditional loincloths and Western clothing, right? But they had very little because they were like, I mean, as poor as you could possibly go, right? So they had castaway stuff, that people had thrown away or whatever, right? Or they sometimes worked like the one woman, Lace, right? She worked as a domestic, right, in a house, and she was a bit abused, unfortunately, too, or not a bit abused, a lot abused, right? Because she was quite attractive. She's a very vibrant, very energetic woman. Anyway, so they had very little. But so the way they set up on the thing there, in order for them to make some money, because well, they didn't really want to work as laborers, right? And when the owners brought them there, well, they were trying to, as much as they can, keep the culture intact. So they made traditional beadwork and crafts, and the people who came to stay there, tourists essentially, they would sell this to them, right? And of course, for this, they'd have their uh, traditional housing hut, one kind of local where people could see what it looked like, kind of available for the people to look at, not where they actually lived. It was a private area. And then they would put on the full traditional outfits, and of course, no shoes for the tourists. Of course, people loved this, and it was great, right? But of course, I'm there every day hanging out with them. As soon as the tourists go, they put the shoes back on and they put the shirt back on or whatever, right? They didn't always. Sometimes they would walk around in the loincloth. It all depended, right, on how they felt. But the shoes, that was very common, right? And the tourists would always lament the shoes. And not only were people coming there for just vacation reasons, we had all the I call them the boffins, right? The experts from all over the world, because to access the Bushmen in like Namibia and Botswana, they're very remote, and you're going to travel multiple days by Land Rover in back roads, dirt roads, hardly any roads, and you might not even find them, right? So they're not accessible to study. These were because you could come to international airport and then take a small private plane, maybe take 6 people or something, and land there on the mountain, right? So, or drive. It's a 3-hour drive from the airport, more or less. So it was very accessible. So all these experts would come to study the Bushmen. They didn't do any studying. They basically just confirmed their own theories. Anyway, I've got a whole story about that. It was in the stories I sent you, Joseph, right? Called Painting the Cave of Expectations. Very good title, I thought, for that story, right? Because that's exactly what happened, right? A very, very profound, very cool title. Anyway, so they would always say, oh man, it's because occasionally one of them would keep their shoes on, especially in like the teenagers or whatever, be a bit rebellious or whatever. And the guests would always lament this, right? Oh, it's so sad to see them losing their traditional way of living. Hey, it was traditional for you once upon a time also to walk without shoes. I don't see you doing it. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's absurd to say that they must not grasp onto an improvement in their standard of living, their way of living, simply because it's not traditional. Every culture has some tradition of improvement as part of the culture, right? Now, sadly, some cultures do tend to slow down their improvement because, well, you got to do it the old way and you got to do it the traditional way, and this takes on this disproportionate value, which slows down learning and growth, right? And it's really sad to see that happen, and cultures stagnate and die because they get so caught up in tradition that they cannot innovate, they cannot learn, and there's a negativity to it. If you innovate and you try something new, then you're anti the culture and you're wrong, and you get into trouble, right? I've seen this happen. It's a horrible thing. I was part of a culture like that, right? Not good, not good. So I'm trying to say that when it comes to appropriation, this is a natural instinct. If I see you doing something that's useful and good, You know, I go and visit you and I say, wow, okay, that's kind of a different way of straining your macaroni. Wow, I never thought I could do it that way. Wow, cool. I mean, today there's tons of videos and sites on it, right? Of household tips of doing things in a better way. You know, like taking the, I just saw one the other day, when you want to separate the yolk from the white. Yeah. You just take a plastic bottle, you squeeze a bit of air out, you hold it over the yolk, and you let it, yeah, and it sucks the yolk into the bottle, and then you squeeze it and back into your bowl, and there you go. Very easy way to take that yolk out. How do you do it without that bottle? Very difficult. Yes, to get it nice and clean, right, Beena? You do lots of cooking. Beena's a most wonderful chef, by the way. Beena, how do you remove a yolk
Yes,
from the
yes,
white?
yes.
How do you do it? How do you do it? I'm just curious. Maybe you got a cool way like
Okay,
this. I don't know.
okay, okay. Before watching this okay, yeah, before watching this video, it was like, okay, we use this small web. It's a strainer kind of like thing, a spatula, which is made of wire thing. So we use that to pull that egg yolk out.
You do what? Say again.
It's a kind of a spoon made of wire.
Right, right. Ah, right, right. It's like a sieve
Yes.
type of a thing. But I'm saying that thing with
Yes.
a bottle, right? And with
Oh
that
yes, it's
implement,
genius.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because with that implement, you still run the risk of damaging it and breaking it, and then it leaks. And right, you know, when you break, but with a bottle like that, it keeps it intact. It's
Yes.
my point is this is appropriation. It's not something that has a specific culturalness to it, but it's appropriation. If we do not appropriate, we're going to stagnate. Part of our learning, part of our innateness is to learn. We appropriate from not just our parents, our siblings, our friends, our environment. We appropriate from everything. This is what learning is. It is appropriation. It's become a bit of a thing with cultural appropriation because this is people claiming the origin of something is theirs. Now, it's very hard to prove origin, but this cultural appropriation, this is just people trying to be cool by claiming something that isn't theirs is theirs. This is like a narcissism type nonsense thing, right? But when I see something and it's useful to me, I use it. I make it my own. Furthermore, end of story. Once it's my own, it's totally irrelevant to me where it originated from. I don't even remember where much of the stuff comes from. And I don't care because it's mine now. I'm using it. I own it. It's mine. I'm using it. I've made it my own. Yeah. The origin, and who knows? But whatever I ascribe the origin to, how do I know where they originally got it from? I have no idea, right? So when you go back over time, everybody got something from somewhere else, right? All things come from somewhere else. It's very hard to go way back to the actual origin. And you know, our culture, any culture is an agglomeration of things that are accumulated over time. And over time, there's influences from everywhere, no matter how remote you are. So to me, this whole idea of cultural appropriation, yeah, don't be a jackass and try and say the medicine wheel is something that comes from, you know, wherever. But you got to be careful. If you really want to claim things are unique, be sure they actually are unique, like this, that Mercia Eledad. And I really wish I could remember the name of the book, but you can go look it up, right? Uh, he showed that many things that were believed to be unique were in fact not so. They were kind of all around the world, right? But people who had only been acquainted with you know, one or two or few indigenous cultures, they believed the things were unique to that culture. He studied them all, and he said, no, it's not necessarily. Some things, yes, but not always, right? So we have to be very careful of claiming things to be unique. Christopher Abbott is here again. Brilliant. Hello, Christopher. Hello, Christopher. So to say one is a shaman in the English word, not in the Siberian word, is a different thing to saying you're a shaman in the Siberian word. This is the way language works, particularly English language. It appropriates terms and applies them globally. Yeah. So the word in English, shaman, is a different meaning to the Siberian word shaman. A Siberian word shaman, this means somebody specific to those cultures in Siberia partaking of that role. The English word shaman means somebody doing a similar role in their unique cultural way in whichever indigenous culture it is in the world. Yeah. So we have to understand how language works. yes, they sometimes take a term that is very specific and it becomes general. And that's what's happened with shaman. But this happens with many, many other words, right? That we use and we don't even think that we use them, right? I mean, I was talking about, well, this was on my podcast interview with Jill, about the word lucent, right? Like elucidate, right? Which is to enlighten, right? And lucence, like the when you look up like as a term that signifies light, right? So many lucents, measurement, a measurement of brightness. Where does that come from? Right? It comes from the origin, the Latin word lux. Now, I may even go further back to Greek or whatever, but mainly because Latin was very widespread used. And it comes from this lux, which means light, right? And this is where Lucifer's name comes from, the bright one, right? So Lucifer means light, a being of light, because he was the first and the foremost, he was the brightest of all the angels. So his name was Lucifer. Now, Lucifer today has a connotation of as a negative word. But when Lucifer first got that name, it was the most positive name you can imagine. You're the being of utmost light, the brightest of all, right? But it's become a negative term. So elucidate has the same root origin. Right? It comes from this term Lucifer, elucidate, light. Right? So when we start to see this, again, look at this word loose. Now, was this appropriated from the Romans? Should we not use this? See, when we say cultural appropriation, we have to be very careful. It's a very tricky thing. And you know, that especially terminology like this, it's unfortunate that this word shaman has this origin. I mean, if that Mercier guy had made up a new word, this would have been great. But it's very hard to coin new words because they don't catch on. And he may have, I don't remember, he may even have had his own word, but it's not up to him which words get used in language. Language is quite fascinating and quite remarkable and quite wondrous. I don't know of anything else where you have a true democracy actually that is functional and operational, like language. Yeah, you mean language is a democracy? I didn't vote on it. Yes, you did. When somebody comes up with a new word, it is popularity and common usage that determines whether or not it gets included into the language. Yeah, and you can go and look up in like Oxford Dictionary or Merriam-Webster, whatever. All the dictionaries, they have teams of editors, and they will usually on a yearly basis they will put out a list of words that have been added to their dictionary. In other words, according to them, these terms are widespread, used enough, or at least used in a niche environment, like within the bubble of its use. Like let's say in a scientific community, right? In say biology, and there's a term and it's widely used, and all the biologists know what it means. Nobody else knows what it means. It still becomes part of the language, right? So there's its usage, and that determines whether words get into there. But you are free to make up whatever word you like. Like, well, okay, Moreness is not a good example because it's got a root and it's a suffix that's been added. So that's just part of the language also. I can't think. I've made up other words, and but Moreness is a good example. A lot of people say, "Oh, that's not a word." I literally had somebody really object to this. Yeah, and it's actually, you can go look it up. It is a word, right? But just take Moreness. I've made this term, and I'm starting to see it. Like somebody said, somebody who knows me. They came on one of the lives one time, right? And they recently had a Moreness retreat. Yeah, and I've seen it used elsewhere. This term starts with me. Now I use it because and I use it, and I'm not trying to make it part of the language. I'm simply using it because it is expressive of something that I'm trying to communicate, and there isn't another word that says this so well as Moreness, right? But over time, it's going to become more and more utilized because it's a word, and this is how our language grows. When somebody finds something that's working and it describes something that they didn't really have a word for before, and then you use it. And sometimes, like with the word shaman, it could have gone to any of the words. That's just a word that happened to catch on, and that's how it goes. Sometimes it's very random how words come into language, and sometimes it's deliberate. Like in my case, I'm not trying to make it part of the English language. It sort of is already, but not in the format. More is used and ness is used. I mean, we have happiness, we have, excitedness, we have all sorts of ness words. It was just never put that ness put together with more. I just happened to be the first one that I know of to use it. I've never ever seen it used anywhere else. And it hasn't been in most dictionaries. It is now. Right? So this is just how language works. It's a fantastic thing. And it appropriates and puts, and somebody comes and, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. And now I don't have to use a whole long phrase or struggle to express myself. I now have a word for it. That's language. That's the magic of language. It's quite wonderful. It's really a cool deal. Yeah. So you're saying, yeah, the terminology is not low. There is okay appropriation, there's not okay appropriation. Yes, I agree. Like in everything else, it's determined by appropriateness, right? And that's why I said, cultural appropriation, where this term starts, because it's not something it's a fairly modern term, by the way. I haven't been around for that long. Where it started was people with egos, trying to be cool and pretending they were something they were not, right? And it's one thing, that if you're really into something and you're very knowledgeable, like I had guys in the store, right? I mean, in the sword and knife store. I mean, we had, I don't know, 10,000 knives and, hundreds of swords, all the walls. The walls were covered in swords. Literally, there was almost no more free space to hang a thing. I even had stuff hanging from the ceiling, right? It was a very cool store. It was like a museum or like an armory, really. And of course, one section of the store was all samurai stuff, right? Because that's a big part of it. And there were some guys, Eric, well, two Erics, right? That I remember. And then what was his name? Well, three guys that were super, super into this. That they were, I would say, they were more samurai than your average Japanese citizen. Because, you take anybody's culture and history, all right, let's say you come from Scandinavia, you've got Viking ancestors, but you're not necessarily into Viking culture, you don't follow the Norse gods or whatever, right? But some people in other parts of the world are. And so because the Viking thing is not currently a big part of the modern culture. Same with the samurai culture. Yes, people like it, they watch the movies, they know about it, but they don't practice it. Those guys that in the store, the three that I'm talking about, in particular that I can think of, man, they knew everything about it. Every single nuance, the whole Bushido way, they lived it, they spoke it, they all the terms, the terminology, they knew it all, right? And it was just fantastic. Now, is this cultural appropriation? No, they didn't say they were Japanese, but to me, they could quite accurately say they were samurai, not from a hereditary point of view or an ethnic point of view, but is there an actual ethnicity to samurai? No, it is a subculture that is based on you being a warrior, not specifically and necessarily you being Japanese. That's happenstance, yeah. But you are an employee. A samurai is like a soldier in any other place, right? And many cultures have, you want to be a soldier, I don't care where you come from, you join the ranks and that's it, you're now a soldier, right? And so this is something that is, yes, it has a specific cultural identity, but we have to be very careful in understanding this. So to me, those customers of mine, they were samurai. There's no other way to describe them. They lived like samurai, they practiced Bushido, they weren't ethnically Japanese, but that to me didn't make them any less samurai. Right? So I have a very different perspective on this, and I feel cultures that are not open to having others partake of it, right? That are exclusive. Those are cultures that are going to die. Yeah. If you cannot share your culture, then to me, and if your culture is based on ethnicity only, well, then it's a racist culture. We have to be careful, right? If you are saying you can only be this culture, Like, for instance, if you say you can't be a samurai if you're not Japanese, how is that not racist? Yeah. I mean, when samurai is based on honor and integrity and loyalty and the Bushido way, etc. See, if you add the racial component into it, you're making it racist. And I don't know. I mean, yes, a lot of people want to claim this because they want uniqueness, they want specialness, etc. But the bottom line is you're making it racist. And I don't know, to me, I go more. This is part of moreness, right? You think it through and you say, wow, I never thought of it that way. I never thought that if I insist that this culture is only available to a particular ethnicity, then I'm racist. And also in our modern world, as you would know, if you go to I don't know what that's, oh, Shia versus Sunni, right? Which again, that doesn't necessarily have a racial component to it, like an ethnic component. This is a belief difference, right, Christopher? Shia versus Sunni, right? This is purely on a belief, and it's an emphasis. If you want to get into the real
Yeah.
specifics of it, right?
It's a
Beena can explain it more better. It's an interpretive
It's a
difference, right?
yes.
Of
Shia and
emphasis.
Sunnis are just as exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's basically just a different school of thought from sprouting
Yeah.
from the same root. So
Right.
they're not different. The shamanism, okay, and of course I don't have any knowledge about this, but I just want to add something because in
Yeah.
Islamic culture there are a lot of things like they have concept spiritually. They have different concepts and different ranks also, like kalandars and kutubs and abdal. They are other than Sufis. They are not Sufis, okay? So Qalandar and Qutub and Abdal, and they are very okay. You cannot find them easily. Nobody actually calls them and say that, or themselves and say that I'm Qalandar. No one say that. But there is an understanding among Muslims that okay, there are people who are spiritually designated as Qalandars and as Qutubs and as Abdals, and they are designations. But nobody, no, you will not find anyone who claims that I am Qutub or I am Abdal or I am Qalandar here. But these are they exist.
Interesting.
They exist. So I personally feel that the spirituality is beyond myself, even if it is coming from Siberia or native Indians and anyone.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
it is going beyond myself. People who are in spirituality, they don't claim things like over me, myself, and things like that. If someone is shaman, they just love to do, and they are using this medium, and they just
Yes.
love
Exactly.
things. They're not into that. Okay,
Exactly.
I am shaman from
Exactly.
Siberia
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Okay, Joseph, yes, of course, it is to give due respect to everyone, and I do respect to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Who is absolutely a white guy and a Viking and has some lineage from uh, other part of Europe also, and he is a shaman and he's
Right.
practicing.
Right.
So
Right.
it is.
Right. It's a
It is
magical
actually
thing. It's beautiful.
yeah, it is
Beautiful.
definitely
Beautiful.
appreciation. We are not
Yeah.
snatching. Okay,
Yeah.
at least in my understanding, nobody is trying to snatch away this thing from Siberia, but it is just
No.
to appreciate that. It is
Yeah.
about the value.
Yeah.
If someone is
Yeah.
getting value,
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
point to think?
Yeah,
Yes.
most
So
people
it is.
who are using the word shaman, like your friend, I don't even think he might not even be aware that the term shaman originates in Siberia. It's not common
Yes, he
knowledge.
might not be. This
Yeah,
title has been given
doesn't
to
matter.
him by others, of
Exactly.
course. Yes.
Right, 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 right. I feel, and I always said this, anybody who's got any type
And
of
I'm
racist
not naming him
characteristics,
because he will not like it. So
right,
that's why I'm not naming
right.
him.
So
But I
for
know
me,
that he
yeah.
has a lot of amazing qualities. Yes.
Right, exactly. Now, I really don't care for racial discrimination. Now, note well, I'm in favor of discrimination. You say, what? Because we've made this association with discrimination when it's used negatively. But if you understand the word discrimination, it's actually the ability to finally distinguish. And that's a very good quality. But when you are distinguishing and making separations based on bogus criteria like racial or sexual or age or whatever, now you are discriminating based on bogus qualities, right? And that is where the negativity comes from. But to me, I said anybody who's got these superiority paradigm nonsense, because that's really the bottom line. When you have racial superiority or age or gender or whatever, right? All of it, you're trying to be superior. That's all, in a bogus way, because you aren't actually. And now you're trying to find some way to make yourself superior, right? To compensate for your lack of it. Anybody who's got any self-worth and value, they don't need to prove it, right? I'm good, I'm fine, I'm happy. I don't have to say I'm better than you, right? This is the insecurity of the superiority paradigm. But now, anybody of those people, I say to them, right, when it comes to this, take any culture in the world. I don't care what it is. Any culture, any ethnicity, doesn't matter, right? And go to a farm and ask the farmer to show you what he does. Yeah. Now, especially if they're doing, plant, not just livestock farming, right? But if they're growing stuff, right? And you go to that farmer's farm, right? And they show you their farm. They all do exactly the same thing. Soil, and they'll run that soil through that.
Sir, we lost your sound. Sorry.
Oh, I was saying, can you hear me now? I was saying,
it is very soft. It is very soft. You did something. You hit something, or
I knocked off my microphone. Sorry, that's why.
yes.
Well, that explains. It was flipped on over here. It's a new microphone I'm testing. Come on now. All right, anyway, I was saying, I always say this to racists, right? Go to any place in the world, any culture, any ethnicity, doesn't matter what. Go and find somebody who's growing things, right? Like a farmer who's growing stuff. And go to their farm and ask them to show you around. And they all end up doing the same thing. I've seen this in many different parts of the world, right? And they will, at some point, they'll stick their hand into the soil. And even if they're in a hothouse, they'll do it, right? They'll stick their hand in the soil and they'll rub that soil through their hand, right? Let the soil come out of their hand like that.
Yes.
And say, man, look at this. Right? They'll feel the soil and share it with you. They all do the same thing.
Exactly.
So to me, when we start to see this commonality, and I look, because part of Way of Impeccability, the language of conceptionality, is to look at abstract conceptionality, to see commonality. When we see commonality, all of this racial and age and gender and it all disappears, and you start to see it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what language this guy is speaking, what religion he believes in, none of it matters. That connection to the earth, this is what's important to him. The rest, it's not that important.
So we lost your sound again. No, it's still not. It will come. We all are different, as Syl is saying that, okay, we all are different, but we all are same at the same time. Because the soul is same, we share the same thing. So Syl, still, we are not hearing you from you. Anyway, this is the beauty of humanity. We all are different. Again, if we look at ourselves, we all are different. It's a funny, just on a lighter note, one of my Chinese friends, they were saying that, okay, because one of my Pakistani friend was teasing them that, you all look same. It's a very famous thing everyone say about Chinese.
Yeah.
But my Chinese friend says, Beena, do you really seriously think like this? And I said, no. Because I was not saying that, I was trying to be polite with them. And they say, because in China, they say the rest of the world looks same.
Exactly.
They were like, and I was laughing like crazy. And they were saying like, are you making and I said, no, it's so funny. It's so funny to just like really amusing to think like that. Because for Chinese people, we all look the same. But for us, and the rest of the world, Chinese people look same. Okay, when I spent 2-3 years with them, and I was like, okay, yes, hanging up, they don't look like same to me at all. Anymore. So it's all about newness. We have to give the margin of the overwhelming of newness we have for about any culture, about any concept, any idea. Once it's new, you have to give margin to become familiar with. And once you become really familiar, then you will see the real true beauty, and it will be okay. Yeah, we all are same, actually. Okay, not different. Sorry, I was just filling in.
No. It's wonderful. You're not filling in. You're sharing your perspectives, which are very important and very necessary and very wonderful. I just want to re-emphasize this point that I was making about seeing commonality. And this is part of Moreness-Culture, which is what we're about. It is a very specific to Moreness-Culture. It's very emphasized in Moreness-Culture. This seeing commonality, seeing the abstract, seeing the connections, right? I've been around, right? I've been around. I went all around Southern Africa. I've been all over Europe and all over America. I mean, I've been like in 46 states, yeah, and I've lived in different parts of the country, and even lived on the res for a while, right? Or one of the reses, right? So I lived in a reed bush for a little while, but that's another long story, right? Anyway, that was where we slept, in the reed bush on the guy's property. Leroy, magical Leroy. Anyway, I was able, I've never had anywhere where I went, and it doesn't matter, you know, when I hitchhiked, I had nothing, whatever, it doesn't matter. When I had stuff, doesn't matter. I was always able to connect with whoever, right? Stayed in people's houses, stayed in their reed bush, and in the case of Leroy, doesn't matter. Always able to connect. Why? Because I'm not seeing them as a product of their culture or environment. I'm seeing them. Leroy was an alcoholic, but I never saw his alcoholism. I saw him. I saw his goodness. I saw his intent to goodness. I saw his moreness. I was like, I don't know if the word revelation or I don't know. I blew his world apart, Leroy, because I connected to him. Same thing with the Bushman. In that story, right? You asked for the stories, and I shared it, and I shared the story about eating the donkey from the pot, right? When you relate directly and you connect to people's moreness, their insideness, to who they are, not what they are supposed to be culturally, right? And it doesn't matter which culture. You can go to New York, LA, whatever. It doesn't matter where, anywhere. Indigenous, like the Bushman, makes no difference. When you have this mindset, you connect to people, the individual, not to the agglomeration, the idea of what they should be supposed to be. Even the idea that they themselves push. This comes from my school days, right? When I was in essentially Beverly Hills 90210, same type of school. I transcended, I cut through all that clickiness. It was an incredibly clicky school. I mean, it was defined by clickiness. I was welcome in any clique. Why? Because I connected to the individuals, not to their clickiness. It didn't matter. Right? So this to me is a way that says, hey, let's connect to people, right? Let's leave aside all of this other stuff, which we have, which like the clickiness. What was it about? It was saying, I'm special, I'm superior. Yeah. And they were just trying to prove that they had value and worth. I come and said, your clique doesn't determine your worth. Who you are is valuable. Whether you might not think so or not. A lot of them didn't feel that they had worth inside. But I connected to that part of them that was their moreness, was their goodness, was their intent to goodness. And they couldn't deny it, even though they didn't beforehand think so, right? And they didn't have a good opinion of themselves. But me connecting to that at the exclusion of all the other nonsense, I was blind to their other nonsense. Was it actually, I saw it, but they realized also in some part of them, some of them might have believed that I was just ignorant of their nonsense. But of course, I saw it all. I just chose to de-emphasize it. It's a very profound skill that I really worked very hard to develop, to de-emphasize the nonsense and emphasize the goodness, right? And I had fantastic relationships with everybody. I was friends with literally everybody in the school. Yeah, it's quite marvelous, right? And this is just, I'm not saying it to pat myself on the back. I'm making a point about a skill, an ability, a mindset, a way of looking at things. Moreness-Culture, right? This is where it came from. Well, it's a long story to it. It didn't just come about randomly. It came from something very significant experience again, right? Where when something significant happens, I learned from it. And I changed my life as a result of this significant experience, right? And especially with the anomalous, changed my life. So this is a way that we can transcend these artificial boundaries. We're all people in the end. And, you know, with DNA now, and especially with modern DNA, you know, like where you can send your ancestry.com or whatever, right? There's a whole bunch of these, right? So there's a massive database now of DNA sampling, which was never available before, right? It's fairly recent that this has come about, which enables scientists, of course, to study DNA in a way that was never really possible. I suppose it technically could, but it's going to be, I mean, to have a study, a scientific study, where you are getting samples from the entire world's population, pretty much, or at least a substantial part of it, widespread all across. This would be a very, very expensive and comprehensive study. But these sites, people are sending it in voluntarily, right? It's quite magical and all this. They now, when you take the DNA and you trace it back, we all have, every single human being on Earth has a common female ancestor, not male, female, right? Let's go back. So when we look at this diversity, and you want to claim ethnic diversity, dude, we may have come apart, but we're all siblings in one way or another, right? Yes, we may have grown very apart. Like, I got siblings that literally are in all over the show, right? I got one in London, I got siblings in South Africa, I got a sibling in Australia, right? So, nicely covering the globe, yes. And they're very different to me. I mean, they are very, very different. If you get to know them, you say, really, are you from the same family? But this idea that we have similarity because we come from the same family, I've always known this to be bogus, because I was never, ever anything like my siblings. And a lot of times when people will friend me on Facebook, they say, oh, where are you from? I say, I'm from the internet. I can't tell you where a country, because I'm not. If I say, oh, I'm from South Africa, well, I'm originally from South Africa. Half my life I've spent in America. Yeah. So I'm not anything like a typical South African. So if I say I'm from South Africa, you have an idea of South Africans. I'm not anything like any South African I've ever met. So it's not representative. And if I tell you about how I grew up, I grew up very similar to my brother. My brother's a completely different person to me. It's all my sisters, right? Yeah. Christopher Abbott says, my brother sent his DNA in. We are more Neanderthal than 92% of participants. I love that. I love that. The Neanderthals have a very negative image, but when you actually look at them culturally, they were very sophisticated at the time, and they may have. There's a lot of academics who theorize that they got exterminated because they were advanced. It's not the more advanced that necessarily survive. It's the more brutal and those that are more insecure. Right? If you understand the superiority paradigm, you see, oh, there's a bunch of clever guys out there. Oh, they're making us look stupid. Well, let's go kill them. It's preposterous. It's ridiculous in our modern thinking. But this is how it happens. This is how it works. It's crazy. Right? So, yeah, so Neanderthals got a bad rap, right? You remember those ads where they had the Neanderthals? I think it was for like Geico. I think it was Geico ads for car insurance. But anyway, they had it where the slogan was, "So easy a caveman can do it." Yeah, and I remember that there was like an escalator, and there was this big post on the escalator, and the two caveman guys are going down. Kind of got that Neanderthal look to them. And they're like very upset about this, and complaining about this. And I always thought it would be very great if one of them comes and you see them in the night and he's got a can of spray paint and he crosses out a caveman and he says, so easy a therapist could do it. Because you saw them later on in therapy and all of this, right? I thought it would make a great ad. But this is quite fascinating. That is super interesting, Christopher Abbott. That your DNA shows that you are more Neanderthal than 92% of the population. Now we have to understand statistics, right? When you say you are more, that means that you and your brother may have 2% Neanderthal, and the average person in the population has 1%. Yeah, which makes you more Neanderthal. It doesn't make you more than 50% Neanderthal. It just makes you relatively have a greater proportion. And it's very important to understand that, because otherwise we can get the wrong idea. When you say that, somebody say, oh, Christopher and his brother are Neanderthal. No, you didn't say you were Neanderthal. You just said you had more Neanderthal in you, right? And like I said, it could be 2% versus 1%, right? The average have 1%. You guys got 2. You got more. right? So it's just interesting how that works out, right? So yeah, I hope you liked my joke about so easy a therapist could do it. Because it's a very long series that they had, these poor guys going to therapy because of this. So easy a caveman can do it, feeling stupid, but I'm not really stupid. But of course, they portrayed as stupid in the show. So yeah, so it's just important to understand our thing. But that's still interesting, that we can trace the DNA, you can see it back. And when you look at this, it's quite fascinating where people say, so wow, I never had any idea that, that I had, what is predominantly, because before our modern age, the DNA was more aggregated, like Greek DNA or whatever, because there wasn't so much cross pollination as there is today. I think today, if you go to any population, you have significant cross-pollination, I call it. I don't want to call it any other term because I don't know, they're negative, when you say breeding or whatever. But cross-pollination, that's a much better thing. I mean, even in nature, right, you have cross-pollination, right? And it's very hard for things to grow up in isolation. I mean, continents, yes, they do have this. But even there, this was proved by, like Kontiki and stuff. Even continentally, there's been some cross-contamination or cross-pollination, right? Even like things being blown by the wind across or whatever, in the ocean that shouldn't be able to get there. It's quite fascinating how we live in a world, even though we may be geographically isolated, we're still connected because you're connected by the winds, jet stream and all this stuff, the oceans, right? So we're all connected in some way or another. It just may take a while for those connections to assert themselves, but we're all connected. And as human beings, they can now conclusively show that we have a common female ancestor, yeah, which in all likelihood comes from a time when that particular group was dominant and there wasn't much competition around and they wiped the rest out. And we say, oh, warfare is a uniquely human thing. No, it's not. Look up chimpanzee wars. You're going to be horrified. Yeah. Yeah, they call that common female ancestor Eve, but it doesn't mean she's an origin. It just means that we can trace it back to her. What came before her, we don't know. And like I said, if you go back and look at warfare, yes, and much of warfare even today, genocidal warfares, it is about eliminating anything other than your particular bloodline. This is common throughout history. So in all likelihood, at that time where humanoids were starting, right, and there was this Eve was obviously probably a very prolific, and because we don't have a common male ancestor, she had multiple males that she was mating with, right? But her bloodline, maybe she was the leader, because if you also go back in time, we see maternal matriarchal societies were much more prevalent, and there was a time where they were dominant. Like today, the paternal culture is dominant, but there was a time when maternal matriarchal cultures were dominant, like in elephants, right? Matriarchal culture, right? And so Eve probably said, "Hey, all her progeny and all the men that were involved, and go and kill all the anybody who's not of my bloodline, kill them all, right?" And they succeeded, right? So there was one group of this where you're starting to evolve, and at some point that it got eliminated to only be that bloodline, right? And this is not an unusual thing. It's just at that time, because you're going way back to the origins, right? This particular, which then evolved further, right? I mean, they may have been related to chimpanzees or whoever, right? Or other or whatever. But I'm just saying, but because they evolved as a bloodline, it became dominant, right? So you can trace the point, but it doesn't mean that originated like in the story of Adam and Eve. Yes, this is something that has been I don't know, storyfied for purposes of it's not biologically or very very sound, obviously. Yeah. But still, they call that common ancestor Eve, yes, but she's not the biblical Eve. Yeah. Yeah. And many cultures, we tend to think of Adam and Eve as the only thing because it's a Western perspective. We don't realize that, go to India and look up the name Adamo with an O, Adamo, Adamo. You see, the same goes way back into time, same origin, same name, even, Adam, Adamo. Now, who came first? We don't know, right? So many of these stories they aren't local. They are we tend to think of them as coming from
Still
I
sound,
lost my
still.
mic. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah, I'm
yes.
back. I'm
Okay.
back. Okay. I don't know
Yes.
why it does that. I would say that, at some point in time, the land bridge of Gibraltar, right? It's known that it was solid all the way across, right? I mean, you can take from the rock on one side, it was solid all the way across, right? At some point, that land bridge collapsed, and likely, that's lower. The Mediterranean basin was just a lake down there, right? And it's lower than the sea level of the Atlantic Ocean. When that land bridge collapses, yeah, and suddenly the Atlantic Ocean floods in and causes the Mediterranean Sea, which is salty, right? Likely before that it was a freshwater, not so big and not so huge, but at a lower altitude, like the Dead Sea in Israel. The Dead Sea is below sea level, right? If you made a canal or something, you could flood the quite easily, have the Mediterranean Sea flood the Dead Sea. No? So to me, an event of that proportion in ancient times, where you've got, obviously it's a big lake, a basin, you got lots of people living all around it, right? And suddenly they all get wiped out. Of course, not everybody gets wiped out. That's why there's a story. But yeah, this would be an event that is going to be so.
Okay, it's off again, still. Anyway, it will come back. It will come back. Not yet. Anyway, uh, we are almost reaching our time. It is huge. It is getting okay. Yes, yeah. I've always like 2 hours
Yeah,
now. This is
yeah, yeah.
wonderful. Okay, you're
Yeah.
back, sir.
So
You're
yeah.
back.
So I just want to wrap up real quick to say that when we study things globally, we get a profoundly different view. Like on flood stories, right? They're all across. I mean, I think even if I'm not mistaken, right, Joseph, you've got flood stories, right, of oceans and lakes and way back when, origin stories that relate in some way to something connected to a flood or like all ocean. This goes back way deep into time. I mean, in Native American cultures, indigenous, right? This is part of the law there as well. And it's nothing to do with Europe, but still, some stories are so deeply entrenched and so emphasized. They get repeated over and over, and they're probably part of our DNA by now, right? Like the flood stories, which is why you see them crop up all around the world. But something that huge, we would have a massive effect. And of course, we can get to New York from Gibraltar via the Bering Straits, yeah, or connected. See, so we tend to think of America being isolated from Europe, but that's not true. Via the Bering Straits in Alaska, which at one time you could cross by land, but also to cross by sea. Anybody who's got even a very basic, watercrafting can cross there. It's not that difficult. I mean, you can see it on the other side, right? You don't need navigation skills or whatever, right? So, I mean, it's not a big deal. All right, it's fairly remote and cold, but it wasn't always that cold, right? Earth has gone through cold periods, ice ages, and warm ages. So we are all connected, is what I'm trying to say. And, we are also very connected via story. It's a wonderful Stanford guy. What was his name again, Beena? Do you remember? Anyway, you can look it up. It's a YouTube video. It's called Your Brain on Story. It's part of a Stanford public lecture series. Remember that
Oh
lecture,
yes.
Beena?
Oh yes.
Where
Oh yes.
he was part of a whole government thing, and where they were studying about story. It's a long story. It's quite wonderful. Nonetheless, they discovered that we are hardwired for story. Hardwired. We have a specific brain, like we are hardwired, like we have a brain that deals with language. Yeah? That allows us to have language and learn it very quickly. It's a brain that's developed to do this. We likewise have a part of our brain, or a specific little sub-brain, because we have many sub-brains, like in your computer, like you could say, right? The different hardware that's specifically like a GPU, whatever. But we have a part of our brain that's hardwired to understand things via story. A very profound discovery. Yeah, yeah. So I love this. Hand pink waving. I like that. I like that. Is that what is the first part? Oh, hi, and hand pink waving. And that comes from Milky Haji. Hello, Milky Haji. That's a very wonderful name. Joseph had a comment there earlier that I read, but I forgot to say out loud. Joseph says, before you close, on another tangent, I thought maybe I'd get to see if Beena would appear wearing a hijab. So before Beena answers, I would say, I don't even know if Beena owns a hijab. I'm guessing she does. But in Beena's family, and her family has a very large um, communal, right? They're kind of the center of a very large community. They interact with many different people. They get visitors almost every single day. On the weekends, they either go to someone else, big family gatherings, right? And extended family and friends of friends. Now, Beena is very culturally active. I don't think anybody in Beena's greater, larger circle wears a hijab. If I understand
Okay.
things correctly. Or
Okay.
very few, right, Beena?
Yes. Okay. Very few in my circle. Joseph, this is my choice. I don't wear hijab because and there are many types of hijabs, of course, like like the burqa and the niqab and the hijab, and well, a lot of things. But I don't wear that personally. This is my choice. Yes, there are some very clear instructions about that, but I'm still learning this process. I choose things which make sense to me, which I feel that, okay, yes, this is right, it has value, even for my religion. And I'm a practicing Muslim, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept everything which doesn't make sense to me. I do
Good for
trust
you.
that it will make sense. Yes, at
Yeah.
some point, maybe, but it
That's
doesn't
your
mean that I
marvelousness.
yes.
Yeah.
So I'm open for that. And not only to Islam, I'm also, okay, I'm a student of other religions also. I do have a lot of Hindu friends and I do respect them and I learn about so many things about their religion, not only through them, but also from books. I do read about Christianity, I do
Wow.
read about Hinduism, Buddhism, and also I
Wow,
do
and
read,
you have a lot of Christian friends,
yes,
whether they
oh
actively
yes.
practicing or not. You know.
Yes, I have. I have
Yeah.
tons of like, okay, really. I have Hindu friends, I have Christian friends, I have Jewish friends, and one of my very dear friend who used to call me daughter, and he passed away just almost a year ago now. Paul,
Yeah.
he was a practicing Jewish person, and
Yeah.
he shared a lot of things about
Yeah.
Torah and other things. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
open
He
for
was
that.
very active in that. Very, very, very powerfully so.
Yes, and in Messenger and chat, he shared a lot of things, and he asked me about, okay, what your Quran
Yeah.
says about this, and then when I shared things. So it's not about your
Wonderful.
thing. I personally feel that
Yeah.
making appropriate choices.
Yeah.
That's why we have to
We,
balance.
we, we, we unfortunately have a very distorted view of not only Islam, but of Pakistan in particular also, right? Well,
Yes.
and Afghanistan as well, right?
Oh yes.
But I saw Beena, you posted on your timeline about those
Yes.
American young people, right? Who
Yes.
toured Pakistan, right? And
Yes.
watch that. Watch that. Go and see. You're going to see a different view. This is more the Pakistan I've come to know via Beena. Yeah, people are
Yes.
very friendly, very outgoing, very inclusive. and you see they like in the middle of nowhere, and they come across this polo match, and then halfway through the polo match, the people start dancing, and they pull them into the dance, and you see the girls there, they're not wearing hijabs, right? At least from the party, and in the group, in the local population, not all are wearing either. Now, I'll tell
Uh,
you something interesting about hijabs. Oh, go ahead, Beena.
yes, please.
I
No,
can
no,
hold my story.
I was also keen to share something interesting about hijab
Go ahead,
and
go ahead, go
burqa,
ahead.
and burqa especially. It is very
Yeah,
convenient. Okay, first
yeah,
we live in a very harsh weather. Okay, so
yeah,
covering up, it is good for skin, so it's skin protection.
yeah.
Second, it is convenient because women do go out, and you don't need to actually dress up every single time. You don't need to put on makeup.
You
They
don't even
can
have to
go.
comb your hair if you don't want to.
Oh yes, and you can. Mostly women wearing denim like jeans underneath their burqa and t-shirts and
Yeah,
tight
tell them
sleeves.
about when you went to the gym, Beena. Tell the story about when I love the story. I love the
Oh,
story.
yeah. Okay. So I went to gym and it was exclusive.
Now,
Okay, for
now, 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 let's be aware a little bit of some background here. Sorry, Beena, to interrupt you because it's important
yes,
for the
no problem.
story. Beena grew up a little bit sheltered. Yes, she has a very wide social circle, her family, but it's still not connecting with
Very
absolutely
protected.
everybody, right? Very
Yes, it is
protected, right?
protected. Yeah.
Because people in that circle protected Beena. Beena grew up as
Yes.
an innocent, as I call him, right? And she
Yes.
still has that, but she's now
Yes.
a sophisticated and innocent both at the same time, right? So people look to protect Beena's innocence, and so Beena goes to the gym. So
Yes.
please continue.
So, because before going to gym, I used to take classes, English language classes. I was doing that for 2 months, um, in early morning. So after that, when I go to gym, I'm the first one. Usually, I was the first one. I have to wait. So there was a bench just next to the main gate, and I used to just sit there and wait and reading some book or something. And there I was watching that, okay, how the women are coming as the time is coming closer for the gym, and they are coming. So like, okay,
And this is like a typical modern Jill with the bicycle and the treadmill and whatever, right?
I will tell you so after that. So, but it was
Uh,
something like, okay, the groups of women are coming in colorful, different colors of abayas. They call it abaya, and all covered. You can only see their eyes. Some of them are wearing gloves also, and they are fully covered from head to toe. And different style, different colors, different material. But the common thing was 99% were covered. I was the different one there. Anyway, so they were coming, but I see that when they were approaching towards me, that I see the sneakers, colorful, latest sneakers they were wearing. Okay, I said, oh, that's good. But when I entered in the gym, so there was a locker room, and after that, there was a gym. So when I entered in a gym, that was really top-notch gym, all glass walls, mirror walls there, music, full beat music, and you can hear Shakira and other, of course, in the music and that. And the women who were wearing the bias, they all were in the gym clothing. It was a scene for me, jaw-dropping scene for me, like a
so
Hollywood
they
movie.
come in this
Yes.
whole outfit, right? Covered. You can't see what they got. They take all this off in the locker room and they got all their fancy gym clothing
And
underneath the
oh yes, it was
Lululemon or whatever.
Hollywood
Yeah.
thing. It was a Hollywood transition scene right there. And
So brilliant.
I was the one who was in the shabby t-shirt, long t-shirt coming towards me, my knees, and
Yeah, yeah,
and I was
yeah,
wearing denim, and I was like, seriously? I was not
yeah.
even aware of it. I saw it is available in Pakistan.
I love this. I absolutely
And
love this story.
believe it or not,
Cultural
they were.
shock, right, Peter? You underwent some cultural shock, yes?
Oh yeah, oh, it was a
Yeah.
big shock for me. And I was watching them. They were measuring every single inch of themselves, and they were, believe it or not, but
Wow.
they were like really super fit, and also that they were going for more
Yes,
dramatic transition.
sculpting their bodies and all of this stuff, right?
Exactly, and they were concerned about that every inch and all that. Okay, no, I
Yeah.
want this and I want that, and I was like, wow, seriously. And of course, they
Yeah.
noticed me as in that okay, she's the one who has no idea what this whole
Clueless.
life.
Bina was clueless right then, right?
Yes,
You were clueless.
absolutely,
You were Miss Clueless. Yeah,
absolutely. And they
yeah.
wait for a week, and then in the locker room, they actually just come, the whole group of women. They approach me
Swarmed
and say,
around you.
"What are you doing?" Yes.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
start advising me, like, okay, you need this, and you have to do this, and you have to take
yeah,
care of
yeah.
this.
Girl, you gotta get this makeup and you gotta get this lipstick and this and that, right?
Yes. And I was super overwhelmed, almost scared. And I said, oh, yes, yes, yes. And then I went out. So this was my
Oh,
experience. This was
yeah,
Pakistan and a
yeah,
cultural shock for me.
yeah.
So
So,
people who are just watching news, just a hint for them. You always
yeah,
see women having holding placards and they are just protesting that, okay, we want freedom. Just look at them, how they are out,
yeah,
not wearing hijab. You will not see any hijab wearing women protesting for freedom. They all are very okay advanced women and modern women, having all those branded glasses and carrying all those branded luxury brands bags and everything, and they are asking for freedom, and media is covering them, and they are open on the street. Nobody is attacking them. So I'm just saying that, okay, the idea and perception is can be different from the reality. So we have to see things in context.
yes.
I'm
Things
not
are
saying
not what
that
they
women
appear
are
to
not
be.
deprived. They are deprived,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
of so many
yeah,
things, but
yeah.
not as much as we have an idea.
Right. And
Yes,
that's why people recommend everybody to travel. Any part of the
exactly.
world, anybody who's ever traveled will ever tell you they always very, very strongly recommend go and travel, because what we've come to believe about other parts of the world is typically just that belief, not fact. Yeah. And especially in the case of Pakistan, the reality and what on the street there you go, it's completely different, right? This is an incredibly generous and open society, which is contrary to what we believe it to be. Of course, because it's open, there's space for everybody to pursue their own nonsense, right? Whether it be
Yes,
good or nonsense. Yeah. And look at America. You got neo Nazis in America, for heaven's sake. You know, the land of democracy and all of this. You got plenty different neo-Nazi groups, yeah, and other types of nonsense groups, yeah. So openness, it enables people to indulge in their stupidity also. It's part of the culture. I'll also tell you an interesting story about hijabs. I grew up in South Africa, right? And I grew up in three different places in South Africa. I was very, very lucky. I grew up in the severe remote country, like about as isolated as you can go. And then I grew up kind of in a middle town that was like a center, but still, a town, but it was mainly, all the wine farms around it, basically like in Napa Valley. And then from there, I went to the super sophisticated city. Yes, the equivalent of New York, Malibu, whatever, any city in the world, right? So I had this whole range of extremes. And in like the culture, for instance, where I grew up at first, in the country culture, super conservative. I mean, one or two steps away from Amish culture, right? They didn't wear the uniforms and they weren't anti-technology. I mean, people had cars, so they didn't drive in horse and buggies, but psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, everything. The conservativeness, same, right? Very, very conservative, very wanting to do your own thing. Yes. Anyway, and in that culture that I grew up with, most women wore a headscarf, a hijab. Now they didn't call it a hijab; they called it a scarf. Part of your standard, like woman, you go out, you take a handbag, whatever, is wearing a
yes.
scarf. This was just standard practice, right? To wear a scarf was just common. It was just what women did, right? A scarf over the head, right? I mean, that thin, see-through type of
Yes.
material, right? Which you
Mm.
typically associate with a hijab. I'm not talking about a scarf around the neck, right? A head scarf, right? It's just common. And as I grew up, it became less and less so, right? And when we moved to the middle town, it wasn't so much of a thing. In a certain section of the population, absolutely. But now you've got to get into the whole different segments of South African society and how people do, and it's a complicated explanation. And it's kind of uncool in a way. I don't care for it much, but it's the reality. And people have their own designations of how they describe themselves, and in a particular segment, this was absolutely, you could not go out in public and be decent without a headscarf. had nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Nothing. No religious connotation to it at all. However, when you went from a religious point of view, those same women who wore the headscarves, when you go to church, you had to wear a hat. When you went to church, you had to wear a hat. Why? Because that actually comes from the Bible, believe it or not. Same with men having short hair. This is something that comes from the Bible. Yeah, Paul. Yes, the second Paul, not the first Paul, the one who wrote 2/3 of the Bible. He said this, he advocated this. Women must wear hats, men must have short hair. Isn't that incredible? Yeah, many people don't realize stuff like this. Yeah, can have centuries and centuries later, can have an effect still, right? It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But, you know, as I, like in the small town, every woman wore a hat to church. That was it. In the middle town, some did. I don't know, I wouldn't even say most, depending on the church. I was very fortunate too, because the church I went to wasn't always available. And so sometimes I went to other churches. So I got to see all the different denominations, right? Whether it was Congregational or Methodist or Catholic, whatever. Doesn't matter. Right? It's quite fantastic. I mean, we were supposed to be Methodist, but there wasn't always a Methodist minister. So when there wasn't one, then, okay, you went to the other churches, right? And I stopped going halfway through my teens. I couldn't get value out of it, right? And value was always important to me. Value for me. Other people got value out of it, but I didn't. So this thing of value always very important to me. Yeah, personal value. I couldn't get out of it, which doesn't mean I'm anti the church. I just couldn't get personal value. So I love. Oh, we got somebody else that joined us, right? Renmat. I can't read the writing there. Is it Renmata? Something at the end of the A. Renmatas. Ah, it's an S. Sorry, it's a little small and I can't see. So, cargo, telegram, crypto, drugs. Ah, come on. What is this? This is on YouTube.
Yes.
And oh, Christopher Abbott is also on YouTube. In my software, Christopher, Restream, right? Because we live on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube all at the same time. It shows me all the comments. Like you see, I'm seeing Joseph's comments, which are on Facebook. I'm seeing your comments on YouTube, and they're not showing me the Instagram comments, but maybe nobody's commenting there. But Ren Martes, I'm assuming this is some kind of advertising or something. I'll go and delete it later on. So yeah, appropriate peace, people. You know, this.
Okay,
this
right
stuff,
now we cannot see that the
yeah.
notifications you have.
Yeah. Well, anyway, just I was saying hello to this Ren Martes, but then I read their message, and it says cargo, telegram, crypto, drugs. I mean, this is not even comprehensible. I mean, spammer. Anyway, well, I say hello to everybody.
We are getting late now, so we will.
Yes,
continue.
we gotta go.
Yes,
It's fun.
go. It's
so,
fun, but it was fun.
I want to just make one last point. Before we started, I said to Beena, I want to focus on something particularly today, and that is us having fun, us enjoying ourselves. And this is what we did. So, and of course, time goes quickly. And look, we didn't even get to read any of the story. We got so involved, and it's wonderful. This is what Moreness-Culture is. Yes, the reading is something that we like to do, but we're not saying we always have to do it. No, we will diverge and divert and shift as appropriate. And that's the key. It was a wonderful shift. So Miliki, Haji, I love that you came and said hello. Yeah. So I like that pink waving. I don't know if it's pinky waving or the color pink, but anyway, I take it as pinky waving. Yeah, because it says hand pink wavy. So, you know, like high hand pink wavy. So that's how I take it. But anyway, nice to have you here. So, okay, boss. Thank you, Doc. So Fine, says Vicky. Wonderful.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Joseph, especially, of course, and Christopher Abbott, and Milky Haji, and Norma, and whoever is going to watch us recorded. Please do click like, subscribe, and share, and please make a comment like you guys do today. Thank you so much for that, because it is going to, of course, give us some feedback that you are finding some value here, and this is what we really want. Okay, we just want to share value in the moreness in life.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
also by doing so, you are going to train your algorithm that this tiny channel is doing something valuable and I want to see more, something like this.
That's the
By
important
doing so,
part. Yeah,
exactly. And by doing so, you are going to ultimately train your life algorithm, because your
yeah,
online algorithm is a nutritional value, mental nutritional value you
exactly,
are choosing every single
exactly.
day. It is going to
Yeah,
impact your online, natural life or live and algorithm
exactly,
also. Please do pay
exactly.
attention to that and train
and
this.
and
Thank
the
you so much.
life algorithm works the same as the online algorithms, right?
Exactly.
What you
Exactly.
emphasize, you tend to bring more into your life, right? Same as the
Exactly.
algorithm, right? It aggregates it, looks
Yes.
for patterns, brings it into your life. So be very cautious with where you place your attention. And also I want to say, like Joseph will, comment like Joseph, share. Yes, we love sharing. We love Joseph's comments. It's fantastic. Joseph always shares. Wonderful. And again, our focus isn't on agree and disagree. It's on understanding. Yes, when we shift out as part of Moreness-Culture, we're looking to undo these habitual paradigms that we live under. We've been taught to always agree or disagree. There are other options. Understanding is so much more potent and valuable and useful than agree or disagree. If you break this habit of looking to agree or disagree and say, hey, I want to understand, now we start to get somewhere. So this is what we're about, right? Shifting these paradigms. Yeah. Very cool, very cool. And Christopher Abbott, love it, love it, love it, love it, right? So sharing, commenting, asking questions, all super important to us. Part of the algorithm training. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye bye, everybody. Bye bye, bye bye. Thank you, Beena. Bye bye, you as well. All right, end meeting.